I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now, and with me today, Gavin Dew, BC Conservative candidate for the Kelowna Mission riding.
Good to be here, Jim.
Thank you for coming in. Lots to talk about. Lots for you and I to talk about. We both kind of like tech too, right? So odd, like you ran for. I'll start with that. Odd, you ran for the BC Liberal. BC. It was Liberal at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah. Now
the BC United leadership. What year was that?
That was 3 years ago. So that leadership ended in 2021.
And you and I did a podcast at that time.
We
too,
did,
right?
yeah.
And you were running for that, and then all of a sudden, just recently, you changed to the BC Conservative Party.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's typical of an evolution that's been happening, right? The common sense economic coalition in BC has had a lot of names. It's been the Social Credit Party. It's been under the BC Liberal Party. And now I think that the Conservative Party of BC is emerging as the vehicle for that coalition. So, you know, it's been a very complicated time over the last few years. But for me, I think it's been a natural transition. I think we're now at the point where what we need to do is we need to make sure that we're focused on defeating the NDP, getting BC back on track, and I see the Conservative Party of BC as being the vehicle to do that.
So I had Alexander Wright in here yesterday, and obviously a little bit of sour grapes for sure, because, and I gave her the hockey analogy, like, you know, when a hockey team has has a center, and then they all of a sudden have an opportunity to get a better center, and they kind of like offer the trade, and they say like you're out, and here's a trade, you can go to Vernon, and some people, if you take up the hockey trade, some people don't like getting traded to, a Prairies team or something like that. So she decided not to take the trade and is no longer with the party.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, this is a party that has been building very quickly. I think of it, you talk about tech, I think about it like a startup that has been scaling extremely, extremely quickly. And that's always challenging. Behind the scenes, when it comes to candidates and nominations and political parties, it is always complicated. It's always really, really challenging when you're trading off across different priorities. But especially when you're building out a party that not that long ago was polling at 5% and now is within reach of government, there's always going to be those challenges and those growing pains as you're trying to get your party ready to be a government.
If we take that hockey analogy, and obviously in a hockey team, you need, a scoring center, a checking center, and all kinds of different things. And you kind of don't fit the mold of what most people are told to believe what a Conservative Party is, right? So you're more of a progressive conservative, I would say.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
I've got a long history in being involved in running and being part of, federal conservative campaigns. I've always been involved in, center-right, small c, and big C conservative stuff. Yeah. But yeah, it would be fair.
Do you think that's the reason they made the trade, though? Because you bring a different dynamic to the table, like, something they needed?
Yeah, I know that, I'll say this. When I was talking to folks in the Conservatives, John Rustad and others, they had approached me a number of times. I was very busy in the private sector. I wasn't in a position to get back into the political world. But when I talked with them, what I said was, guys, I think it's really important that if this party is going to be in a position to form a government, we really have to reach that middle of the road, economically and fiscally focused voter that we haven't got yet. That's the missing 5 or 7% that is going to take us into government. And when I went and had those conversations with them, they didn't tell me to go away. They said,
so did you go to them and they come to you?
We'd been talking for a long time. I mean, John's approached me a number of times over the last probably 2 years, even as he was building up the Conservatives. Right. I'd been approached. Look, even the NDP approached me. Right. And I think that the reason why that was the case is that I do have a track record and a history of being involved in politics and of being successful at bringing in the next generation, being successful at building that bridge with the business community, with the next generation.
Yeah, you're like that left shooting defenseman that people don't have.
I wouldn't want to say left shooting, but certainly.
I don't mean left. I mean just like a left-handed shot. Sometimes it's hard to get as a defenseman.
Well, sure.
Like that, right?
Look, I'm really excited about what I've been able to bring to the party, and I can tell you, look, the minute that there was even speculation that I might be joining the Conservative Party, my phone started blowing up, and the folks that were calling me were people that had long track records being involved, on the center right in small C conservative politics in BC, in the former BC Liberal Party, and what they were were all saying, echoed my public message, which is it's time for us to unite, it's time to move forward together, and it's time for us to focus on what the priority should be, and that is getting rid of the NDP and getting BC back on track with a new government.
What do you say to the criticism of some that are saying that you're just a political opportunist?
I think, look, to be honest, I've got a really healthy career in the private sector. I've had a lot of opportunity to make impact there. And if I was just pursuing opportunity and what would be, the simplest, best option for me, I'd probably be doing something over there. I looked at this moment right now, and what I saw was a really challenging moment where we need to navigate through these next few months with a really, really delicate touch in order to make sure that we can not only get a new government, but also reunify our coalition. So, look, I'm signing up, frankly, for what I think is going to be a very difficult few months and a very difficult few years that's really, really important. And I did so with a lot of hesitation. I wrestled with it. It was a family conversation. I knew that there were going to be people that I'd worked with previously who wouldn't like the decision that I made. So if I was looking for the easy choice would have been to stay in the private sector, make money, snuggle my kids, and watch Disney movies.
So you are a family man.
Yeah.
So in the beginning, when John Rustad decided to do this, he'd been painted with a paintbrush mainly by the NDP the BC United has painted him too as an extremist, a radical, a Trumpian. I mean, I interviewed an NDP MLA and called him Trumpist and a threat to democracy and all these different things and homophobic, race, all the the ist words out there, and it's hard for them to keep sticking those things on him because he's made some changes in the party that would make it tough for you to put all those labels on him, like Eleanor Sturko joining on. Even yourself, I would label you as I don't like labeling anybody, but as a more progressive conservative, like heavy into tech and believing in different things, but still believing in that you say that small c, but what's good for people and families and stuff like that. So how do you reconcile that with all those things that were said to John Rustad? Even Andrew Weaver coming out and said that he would, he likes that John Rustad's willing to listen. So yeah, and he's a climate scientist, and some people have accused John as being a climate denier, but when we talk to you recognize the climate is an issue that we need to face. So. Do you think that the party is moving more towards the center where it wants to serve all British Columbians as opposed to a significant or a small piece of it?
Yeah, I think that what the party has successfully done, and I certainly am part of that, is continue to grow the tent. Right? If you look at the polling, we are now polling ahead of the NDP. And the reason for that is that people are deeply frustrated with the direction that David Eby's been taking this province, right? For someone who does start with a fairly economic lens on the province, what I see is a province where we've had 3 straight months of declining jobs. We've had 5 years without net private sector job growth, while the size of government employment has grown by 1/3. So we have a really unsustainable situation, and we have huge deficits and debt and economic decline. So I think the NDP would rather talk about anything other than their record and anything other than the substantive issues that are facing the province. I think that we've got to make sure that as a party, we're continuing to articulate that really solid message around business and the economy that has always been what unified the Common Sense Economic Coalition, what people have called the Free Enterprise Coalition. It's a focus on common sense solutions. It's a focus on balanced solutions. It's a focus on making things better for people and families.
So I interviewed Sonia First to Know the other day as well, leader of the BC Green Party. And she came out and said that we need to scrap the carbon tax at the pump. We need to stop punishing the people. If there is to be a carbon tax, it should be at the wellhead as opposed to punishing the people. What is the Conservative position on the carbon tax?
Scrap the tax. But I think here's the thing. The fact that even Sonia First now is acknowledging that, it tells you that the carbon tax has ceased to be policy a long time ago and has just become a political issue. So, I have friends that were involved in creating the carbon tax. I have, there was a time when I thought the carbon tax was good fiscal policy. Now I look at it and I say, look, this is a tax that is just a political issue where it gets used by either side to beat each other up. That's not good policy. So my belief is we need to address climate, we need to address environmental issues, but let's do it in a really practical way. So for example, let's talk about wildfires.
Yeah. For sure. But just sticking with the carbon tax for a second.
Sure, you bet.
It clearly punishes the people that can least afford it. It's at the pump, right? And it's people having to choose between, putting a full tank of gas in or a half a tank and then being able to have enough money to go do groceries because people are maxed out on their credit cards. We've seen the standard of living drop in British Columbia. How can the NDP and the federal Liberals continue to push this carbon tax when they clearly can see that it's hurting Canadian families?
I think it's because they become so committed to it as a political identity marker. So it no longer really is about practical policy. It no longer really is about how to make an impact on climate. It's really been about the idea that if you believe in this, you're one kind of person, and if you don't, you're another. And I don't think that's the way we go about solving things. It's the same thing we're seeing here around short-term rental policy. The NDP have made it a political issue rather than a policy issue. They've committed themselves to a policy that everyone can see is not having the intended effect and is having a lot of downside consequences, but they can't walk it back because they're so politically committed to it. That's why we have this opportunity for a reset where we can rebalance some of these policies and try to achieve good goals, but do it in a way that's driven by common sense and data.
Is it time to start talking about issues instead of the mudslinging that's going on, especially between the BC Conservatives and the BC United Party, when the real, obviously, if you're, again, we take the hockey analogy, your goal should be to go after the top team as opposed to, beating each other up.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm a pretty... I'm a nerdy guy, I'll be honest about it, right? I care deeply about policy. I care about how policy interacts with the folks that are actually affected by policy, whether that is people and families, whether that is, the person at the gas pump, whether that is a small business trying to survive and thrive. So I really do hope that we're going to have more of a policy-driven conversation in this election. I do think, to your point, look, it's probably going to be a pretty hard-fought election. The NDP are already starting to go very negative. I think we're going to see more of that because, frankly, they're scared. They're falling behind, and I think that they don't know what to do now that they're not being handed an easy re-election because of a vote split. But in order to make sure that we actually do defeat the NDP and we actually do get a new government that can get BC back on track, folks in the Conservative Party and BC United really have to stop doing the NDP's work for them. We need to make sure that we're getting unified. We need to make sure that we're focused on the task at hand.
I think the rhetoric of voting for the Conservatives is a threat to democracy is one of the most foolish things, because telling people that voting your conscience is a threat to democracy is the real threat to democracy. And I put that to Sonia too, and she agrees. She said, that's enough of that, right?
Jim, in my experience, insulting the voters or insulting the intelligence of the voters is rarely a good political strategy. People are smart. People can read the news. People know what is going on. They know their candidates. If they don't know them, they're going to get to know them. And we have to have a level of trust in the fundamental intelligence of everyday people in the electorate.
You're a tech guy. You're big in AI. We're actually holding an AI summit, plugging ourselves here. We're holding an AI summit September 27th in Kelowna here. And because I believe that technology is probably our path forward to deflation, our path forward to abundance and a better future for everybody if we utilize AI in the right ways. What's your thoughts on AI and how it can better the lives of British Columbians?
Yeah, I mean, look, tech is in everything, right? It's not a vertical, it's a horizontal. It cuts across every industry, whether you're in, the oil and gas sector, whether you're in agriculture, whether you're in entertainment, everything is driven by tech. And AI obviously is a really impactful new wave within tech that has hugely disruptive implications. There's a ton of massive opportunities in tech. There's also what's called skills-biased job dislocation, which is where people that are well adapted or that have the opportunities to gain from tech are going to be in a great place. And there are also going to be jobs that are disrupted or that change as a result of tech. So I think what we need is to make sure that we have a government that understands the huge potential, also understands the implications, and is going to do a good job of working with industry and working with people around that. Just on your forum, my belief is we have a huge opportunity to grow the profile of Kelowna as a destination for tech and tech investment to really get those wheels spinning at full speed. But we've got to be aware, right now, there was a recent study out that showed that Alberta is actually now pulling ahead of us on technology. Calgary is now third in the country for venture capital activity after Toronto and Montreal. So we need to pull our socks up. We need some really serious policy around how we can help industry, help tech to grow in British Columbia and Kelowna more specifically. And that's an area that I'm confident I'll be very involved with.
If we look at one of the biggest threats that face the Okanagan, that being wildfires, you mentioned a few minutes ago, and how we can apply AI to that. I've interviewed a few companies that have early detection, and then I've talked to other people that say they have autonomous water bombers that can go out and work 24 hours a day, as opposed to right now we work in the daylight hours and then leave the fire to itself, at the nighttime. We can attack the fires, we can detect faster, and we can attack the fires faster, and then we can work the fires longer, and that would go a long way to mitigate that. But also, forestry itself is suffering, and then I talked to John Rustad, and he said forestry is a shambles. Like the way permitting and getting access to like pine beetle kill and burnt trees, the permitting process is just abysmal. And I've talked to the forest minister and the jobs minister, and they recognize that. But I mean, they've had 9 years to fix it.
They've had 9 years to fix it. Like, let me give you an example. In actual fact, one of the things that the NDP did is cancel a pilot project for using AI to detect wildfires early. That was actually a project that was brought in as a result of their agreement with the Greens when they formed their coalition. So, I mean, when you look at the scope and possibility of technology to help us with wildfire, you can look at the level of investment that's happening in California, for example, where they're way ahead of us in using AI to detect the presence and path of wildfire. In BC, what we do right now, which is absolutely crazy, is we spend 9 times as much money on fighting wildfires as we do on preventing them. So we could be switching that balance. We could be putting a very significant focus on wildfire. And when you start looking at emissions, which are important, Mother Nature doesn't care where emissions come from, right? So in Canada, about 3 times as many emissions come from wildfires as come from the entirety of industry and human activity. Right? We comprise a very small portion of global industrial emissions. 2 years ago, we were 23% of global wildfire emissions. So if we want to get serious about addressing environmental impact and talking about climate, then in my view, one of the things we should be doing is putting a full court press into addressing wildfires much more proactively.
Do you think the BC Conservative Party is the party to elect to look at this wildfire and forestry? Like it seems like the forestry industry, we've lost 10,000 jobs in 2 years in the number 2 industry in British Columbia at the same time that Alberta is growing its industry. So you can't say that it's like I've been told, it's across the world like that. Well, it's not in Alberta. So will the BC Conservatives focus on forestry and focus on wildfires? Yeah,
absolutely. Look, getting forestry back on track, crucial. Addressing wildfires, I mean, just for people in the Okanagan and broadly in rural British Columbia, it's hugely impactful. People down at the coast are seeing and experiencing it too, but it's obviously so close to home here. We all have experiences, very close to home. So it's absolutely an area we're going to address. And I think just going back to the fact that Alberta is succeeding where we're not, part of that is very specific and policy driven. Part of that is also when you go to Alberta, as I did a couple of months ago to a venture capital summit on agricultural technology, which is an area I've done some work in. It's the message and tone. There is a message and tone of we can do this. There is a message and tone of if you want to come here and you want to be successful and you want to build something, we want you to be successful. I think we've really lost a step in BC where, Canada is in a crisis of indecision around getting stuff done, and BC is in an even worse situation where we've made it very difficult to do things on the land base. And we're in a position where folks that want to build and create new businesses, frankly, can't afford to do it here or are feeling taxed to death. So they're going to go to Austin, Texas, or they're going to go to Calgary. And that is really, really challenging because if we lose that next generation of job creators who aren't tethered to the land base, who could be building things anywhere, we don't get the jobs. We don't get the opportunity. We don't get the prosperity that comes from that. So I think we need to address the policy side of the equation, but we also need to deliver a really clear message that BC is going to be a place where you can get stuff done again.
Because when we have a company like Canfor, an AP group, saying they can't operate in this province that has the highest stumpage rates in North America, and Canfor pulling on it. And Canfor is an originated BC company,
yeah,
right? And in Merritt, there were 6 mills operating when the NDP took power, and there's 0 operating today. I mean, and then when I talked to the jobs minister, she said, well, we want to do more value-added stuff with timber. And I said, well, I would argue that sawmills are a value-add because that's how we build houses. And she did agree with that. But so how do we put those mills back to work?
I mean, look, I'm not going to claim to be a forestry expert, but I think a big part of it is about creating stability and predictability. It's about making sure that there's secure access to fiber. It's about making sure that we're not continually sending signals to industry, both the forestry industry specifically, but also more broadly, that we're not constantly sending these signals that this is not a hospitable and welcoming jurisdiction, right? One of the things that really worries me is we're coming to the end of a set of major capital projects here in BC, right? We've got Trans Mountain, we've got Site C, we've got LNG Canada. As those wrap up, there is nothing in the hopper. There are no new major private sector investments. And part of that is we've created conditions where people are not confident about investing capital here, whether it's in forestry or whether it's anywhere else.
So the BC United will tell you, and rightfully so, that those 3 projects are theirs, that they started those. What projects would the BC Conservatives, or do you have knowledge of what big projects that the BC Conservatives would put forth for British Columbia?
I mean, look, number one, I think it's premature for us to start talking about that. Number two, I think most importantly, we have to make sure that yes, we're building public infrastructure, but we're also attracting private investment. It is not the business of government to tell the private sector what it should build. Right? What needs to happen is that when you have private sector investors who want to build things, you have to understand what actually shapes conditions for investment. You have to work with those folks to shape and steer what they're trying to do. And you have to make sure that at a broad level and at a project-specific level, the signal they're getting is, we want your investment. We want the jobs that it creates, and we're going to walk with you and help you figure out how to do it. So, that's where, again, it's about making sure you've got a government and you've got people in that government who know how private sector investors make decisions and who are able to work with them to create conditions where it makes sense to invest here again.
You're very good at articulating yourself. You understand technology very well. How do you think, if we go back to the hockey analogy, what value do you think you'll bring to the team once you're at the table?
I mean, the first thing I'd say is we've got a lot of strong players on the team, and I'm really proud to be joining a team, both widely but also locally. We've got really great candidates here in Kelowna and the Okanagan more broadly. But for me, I know that one of my strengths is working at the intersection of public policy and business. So understanding how to talk to the business community, understanding how to talk to small business, understanding the complexities of navigating complex major projects, which I've done a lot of work on, understanding areas like the tech sector, and being able to really build that bridge between both the Conservative Party at an electoral level, but also when we defeat the NDP and form a new government, it's about being able to work really well with the business community, with the drivers of the economy, and help to make sure that we're shaping policies that are going to create jobs for people here.
This is a tough question for you. I don't know if you can answer it. With the changes in the capital gains tax, it's driving away talent from Canada in general, not just British Columbia. And like in British Columbia, seems to add a lot of taxes. The NDP has added a lot of different taxes since in their 9 years here. Will the BC Conservatives repeal some of those taxes, release the short-term rentals, and all those things that have been kind of regressive for British Columbia?
Yeah. I think we're going to have to take a pretty fundamental approach. There's some obviously, what tends to happen is you end up talking at a very specific level about very specific taxes because, frankly, it's good politics to talk about things that people hate. Now, what happens with any tax system in any province or any country is it just stacks up and stacks up and stacks up, and you end up with a bunch of skewed incentives. You end up with just layers upon layers of detritus left over from years or decades of decision making. So I think we need to look really seriously at some of what our tax system is doing, both in terms of affordability, but also in terms of the skewed incentives that it is creating, because there are some really unsustainable issues there. When it comes to short-term rental, which you mentioned, look, that's one where we clearly need to go back to the drawing board. Right now, what the NDP have done is they've taken a sledgehammer approach in a scenario where a surgeon's scalpel is what is needed. And that has contributed very substantially to an absolute collapse of tourism in Kelowna and the Okanagan more broadly, which is really hammering, our $3+ billion wine industry. It's really, really having a negative impact. Now, of course, there are good goals behind some of what they were trying to achieve there around housing affordability, all those things. But fundamentally, what they've done is created the tourism sector. They've created conditions where people who made investments on the basis of the laws at the time have had the rug pulled out from under them, which is just not fair. So I think we're going to have to go back to the drawing board really seriously and do what the NDP didn't do, which is actually talk to stakeholders, actually look at the data, actually make sure that we're trying to define nuanced, balanced policies that achieve the goals you're trying to achieve without all of these unintended consequences.
Kevin Falcon came out with and said part of their policy would be to eliminate the provincial tax for people making less than $50,000. Premier Eby responded by saying that's extreme and radical. Thoughts on that?
Look, a couple things. Number one, I don't think that was a fully thought out policy from a fiscal perspective. A lot of economists on kind of both sides of the spectrum looked at it and didn't really take it very seriously. I think more importantly, you need to look at that as what it was, which was a Hail Mary pass from a party that's currently polling in third or fourth. No disrespect whatsoever to Kevin or to BC United. There are, a lot of good folks stuck in awkward positions there, but the reality is there is only one choice to defeat the NDP and get BC back on track. That's the Conservative Party of BC. And as a result of that, I think people looked at that announcement, which I'm going to assume was intended as a Hail Mary pass to try to get some traction. Well, in the week after that policy was announced, they went down like 2 points in the polls. So at this point, I actually don't know that people are taking seriously those kinds of proposals from that party, unfortunately.
I did see a video circulating out there that people are trying to push to kind of like define what the parties are, and one of them is they're trying to the BC United trying to separate itself from the federal Liberals. But they did have an attachment early on with the federal Liberals, so they're trying to put some distance there, and they're also trying to take away the connection that people draw from your party, the BC Conservatives, and the federal Conservative Party. There is no actual affiliation between the two parties, but obviously there is a big movement with the federal Conservatives across Canada that is very favorable. And I believe that a lot of people see the C right now and they see it as a message of hope.
Yeah, there's a lot of alignment. And, when I talk to people, 2 years ago, I think you would get that dynamic where it was, well, I'm a federal Conservative, but now it's if you're a Conservative, you're a Conservative. And I think it is almost simplifying at this point. What I think is maybe left in that, say, 9% that is still there in BC United is folks that are still wrestling with that existential crisis around a change in what the vehicle for the Common Sense Coalition is. I think there are folks in there that if the BC United Party decided not to contest the election, there's folks that would go and vote NDP. There's folks that would vote Conservative. But again, I think the focus has to be on what can we do to make sure that we don't have 4 more years of David Eby and the NDP, and that we get a good government in there that's going to operate on common sense, that's going to get BC back up on track and clean up the mess.
I did ask Sonia if they ended up in an Andrew Weaver situation, would they work with, which party would they like to work with? And she said she'd work with anybody. If the BC Conservatives and the BC United are the only way they can form government, is that something, maybe not under your purview, but is that something that...
Yeah, that's not up to me, and I can't prejudge that, right, obviously. But I do think that, it's really important that folks who have been, formerly BC Liberals, which was the vehicle for the small C Conservative Common Sense Coalition, folks that are in BC United, I think it's important for them to know that the water's warm and the doors are open, right? Come on over. What we need to do one way or another, hopefully it's before the election, if not, it's going to be after the election, we have to bring the Common Sense Coalition back together again. And, the historical precedent, the polling, the people voting with their feet, everything to me suggests that we are reconsolidating that coalition under the Conservative Party of BC. And I think it's going to be crucially important not only for folks to come on over, but for us to make sure that they're welcomed into our coalition.
I think I'll end it with this. We're still seeing hospital closures. We're still seeing those hospital closures. And a lot of that had to do with the vaccine mandate. The only province and whatever area in North America likely that continue to hold it. Could not the NDP do more right now by like sending doctors and nurses from the Lower Mainland out to service these hospitals until they get that rectified? Because it seems like you're asking people in rural and in many cases it seems like the NDP don't really care about what happens to the rest of the BC other than the Lower Mainland, because so many things seem to favor the Lower Mainland, and people being asked to drive 200, 300 kilometers for healthcare services seems to be unreasonable.
I was sitting in the waiting room in the ER recently, and I met a woman with her young daughter, and they had driven 10 hours. Right, they were visiting family. They were there. They were trying to get in to see someone because her daughter had something happening, and they waited for 3-4 hours. And eventually, while we were sitting there, they just kind of got up and left because they needed to go and do other things. They weren't getting access to care. Yeah. So there is a crisis in our healthcare system. I think the fact that the NDP held on for so absurdly long on the mandate issue out of ideology rather than any practicality certainly contributed to that. I think that, frankly, I don't think you're going to see the NDP make decisions to help rural British Columbia at the expense of the Lower Mainland right now, because as it stands, what they're doing is they're retreating politically to where their bunker is. And when the NDP is in a position of being close to defeat or of being defeated, they don't care at all about rural British Columbia.
Yeah, some people will say that like a lot of the questions I have seem to be anti-NDP. They're the ones in power. They're the ones that need to be held accountable. I just want to make sure people are aware of that. They're the ones that have had the wheel for the past 9 years. So they're the ones to be held accountable. The rest of you are trying to take the wheel.
Yeah, and I think it's important that we act as good, reasonable critics. And I think, to be honest, one of the reasons why what was then the BC Liberal Party started to really fall apart is not doing the job of holding the government to account, particularly during COVID. And I think that led to kind of a breach in confidence. I think that there were a lot of people that when I was running to lead the BC Liberal Party, I took meetings with people that their MLAs wouldn't meet with them. So there was that sort of loss of trust. There was that collapse. I think that was a real problem. I think that, yes, we need to hold the NDP to account, but it's also incumbent on us in offering to be a new government. It's incumbent on us to be putting forward solutions. And that's something that I'm really focused on.
Is there anything else you want to add? You want a message for the Okanagan here, for especially your riding, Kelowna Mission?
The one thing I want to just keep on coming back to is that we need a change in government, right? We've seen a scenario where there's been the economy is doing very poorly, where we've seen complete fiscal mismanagement, where we're seeing deficits and debt and economic decline, and we see absolutely no indication that the NDP is going to change anything other than for the worse. So everybody that I talk to knows that it's time to get a new government to get BC back on track with common sense change. And frankly, more and more people that I talk to are agreeing that the only party that is in a position to do that is the Conservative Party of BC. So I hope that folks will rally around that flag. I hope that folks will meet their candidates, talk to their candidates, and I hope that they'll vote Conservative.
And we'll leave it at that, and would like you, the viewer at home, to subscribe to KelownaNow. We're still under the pressure of Bill C-18. So if you can subscribe to KelownaNow on YouTube, sign up to our newsletter, visit our website on a daily basis, follow us on X and TikTok and all those other channels until we can extricate ourselves from the Bill C-18.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Jim.
And thank you for watching KelownaNow.